Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. We created this show to be a series of conversations with leaders of mission based organizations. It was birthed from the pandemic and the fact that we, everyone, were all navigating new waters was a way for us to think about developing a conversation about how to get through these times. We also wanted to give our audience three different perspectives, offering lenses from our own experience. After our shows, we get a lot of feedback and questions. And we often address them as they come in emails, and sometimes we get a chance to discuss them at the next show. But today, we want to focus solely on the questions we get asked. To our surprise, we have to tell you that many questions are related to nonprofit consulting, specifically about how we work with nonprofits. So go ahead and grab a cup of coffee and join the conversation for the next half hour as we discuss topics that are urgent to the leaders of mission-based organizations. We're going to get started with introductions. I see some of you on. Please tell us your name and where you're from, state or country, so that we can thank you for being on the show. We also invite you throughout the show to put your comments and your questions in the comments section, and we will answer them as we go throughout. This way you are engaged in part of our conversation. So I'll start with introducing myself, and then I'll bring in my co-host. My name is Cynthia Rojas, and I am the principal and founder of a management consulting firm called To Your Growth. I specialize in change management, organizational development, and leadership development. I want to bring in my next co-host, Rebecca Tuttle. Hi, Rebecca.
Good morning, Cynthia. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm Rebecca Tuttle. I'm the founder and creator of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good. We help schools, nonprofits, organizations, and businesses find, write, and secure grant funding, and we teach you how to do it.
Yay. Let's bring in Peter, our third co-host. Hi, Peter. How are you this morning?
Hi,
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
My name is Peter Blakely, and I am the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting. I help mission-based organizations measure and maximize their impact.
That's awesome. Before we jump in, I mentioned in the intro that we started this work wanting to have conversations with leaders as we were all navigating new waters. And that the three of us bring three different perspectives or lenses that we wear based on our experience, based on our education, and based on the work that we've done for decades. I want to first go into what is the lens that we've been offering throughout these 12 weeks. So let's start with Peter. Peter, tell us a little bit about the lens you wear when you're thinking about organizations and challenges.
So I'm an evaluator, but I generally don't do the big evaluations that come at the end of projects. I work with organizations to build their feedback structures so that they can create their own information and then use it to make their programs better and stronger. So what I've been thinking about these last few weeks is, one, a lot of organizations were getting to a point where they had a data system in place, and now it's been disrupted because the program itself has been disrupted. So right now is the time to think, what information is useful right now? How can we gather it and to pair things back to what are the things that we can manage and manipulate and control in a time like this?
Cool. So when you're faced or you're being asked about organizational challenges, you look at it from a data perspective. How are people looking at their data? How are they using it to improve their programs? Things of that nature.
Right.
Beautiful. Rebecca, tell us a little bit about the lens or the hat you wear when you're working with leaders and organizations.
Sure. So my background is nonprofit management. I've, been boots on the ground, home visiting, all the way up to executive director. And through that work, I have really expanded my fund development portfolio from a fundraising perspective, but also a grant perspective with a focus on sustainability. So my lens isn't just, bring me on board and I'll help you write one grant and that will be it. It's more building a sustainable practice as a nonprofit with resources and revenues from all angles, all areas, so that you build not just the foundation financially, but you also build that donor support, that stakeholder support as well.
Wow. So you really see it as an organizational wide effort.
Absolutely.
So is one task, but that this is really about organizational structure. Wonderful, wonderful.
It's about data too, but we'll get back to that later.
Yeah. Well, some of the questions I just wanted to, I don't think we've ever spoken about the lens in which we approach our organizational work. I remember having spent some time doing that. So I work with organizations in thinking and looking at how to create change within their organization, either because they're building upon their infrastructure or they need to redesign the infrastructure. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means, because I get asked a lot about change management. It is also related to organizational development, right? So, for example, times like now, nonprofits are really looking at redesigning or restructuring their organization. And so what are the key programs that we keep? How does that impact your clients? What's the experience they're going to have now? And who are the staff that get to stay to carry on the work? So things of that nature is what organizational development and change management encompasses. And I'm always thinking about the people. Always. It's like, well, how would the staff feel when this is implemented? So that's the lens in which I wear. So cool. Okay, so I'm going to start with Peter. So we get these questions. Peter gets this question often, and she alluded to it a little bit in the intro before. But as an evaluation consultant, right, I'm sure you find that many programs think evaluation is something that happens at the end of a program. Yeah. Why would a program hire someone like you for a program that's still running?
Right. Or a small program. A lot of programs think it's an extra and an add-on, and the audience for it is a funder or somebody who's asked for it. But I believe in building dashboards. What is the data that is going to be helpful to you right now? And think about it like the dashboard on your car. It's useful to understand how fast we're moving and that we're headed in the right direction before we get to our destination. Always working with programs that are making adjustments and changes, right? Yep. How do they use data in their planning and in that decision making?
Yeah. So I only work or primarily work with using data to make decisions. Otherwise, you're going on too much subjectiveness, and that can be problematic, right? So often when people want to change something, one of the first questions I ask them, or sometimes they actually hire me to do this, but the organization usually knows, is what's driving your desire to make this change? What's driving your desire to move your work forward? And so it should be rooted in some data, right? I get nervous when people say, well, we know that our clients want X, Y, Z. And so how do you know that? Well, because they've been our clients for years, but have you ever surveyed your clients? So you should use data before embarking on any change. Otherwise, you might find yourself in that training and that change management cycle again very soon after.
Or before you decide to make no change.
Right.
I think even if you are doing the thing you've been doing for 10 years, it's worth looking around you. You've got to look at the greater environment and ask yourself occasionally, is this still the right thing to be doing and the most effective way to be doing it?
especially now that, when things are so unpredictable, you're going to have to ask yourselves that question very often.
Right. And it's it's a good opportunity to say, like, what is the change that our organization is committed to affecting in the world, and what does that look like right now?
Exactly.
Because we're in the unknown, that data is going to change frequently. And so it's almost as if we're piloting or testing out what we're assessing, and then taking pieces of what works and leaving to the side what didn't work as we go along. So there has to be an evolution of the evaluation, especially for us in funding, but for an organization, and realize that right now everyone's testing it out. I imagine, Cynthia, that doing change management work, well, I know it's very difficult, and there's an emotional piece with it, that comes along with it. How do you handle that?
I actually think that was a great question. So for me, change management is really about behavior, right? I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. You almost have to become a behaviorist to really understand change. We've had theories about how people don't resist change. They grieve loss. So leaders can benefit from allowing staff to express the loss that they're feeling as a result of change, especially large organizational change. That's tough. I've watched a nonprofit go from, working really well based on its experience and what it knew to be best practice, to then becoming accredited, which then brought on 2,500 standards into the organization. That was great change, because now someone was saying you have to do things this way. And if we didn't allow the staff to grieve the loss of some of that autonomy and to feel like they were still appreciated because they built a lot of this, that change would have been unsuccessful. So you have to understand that for change to be successful is not just saying this has to happen. You really have to understand human behavior and what drives and motivates change, and then include that in your change management plan.
And when we study human behavior in fund development as well, why do people give? How can we share a message with them that resonates with them to want to participate with our mission and support our work? Human behavior is something that you really want to be mindful of and pay attention to, and listen to people. I like that answer, Cynthia. That's really interesting.
And it's interesting what you're saying. You're reminding me, when I was learning about fund development, I learned that there's 7 emotions that gets looked at. I hope I'm not revealing any secrets. Or that there are 7 reasons and there are emotions attached to those reasons as to why people give. And so the role of the fund developer, right, is to understand those emotions and to understand what motivates people to give, and then work on tasks or work on initiatives that tap into that knowledge.
And I'll give you a secret that I do when I'm trying to engage donors. So to your very point there about those, reasons why people give, if you're trying to figure it out and you think, I can't figure out why people just won't give here, why isn't this working? Sit down and write what those reasons are for yourself. Why do you give to other organizations? Why do you support other groups and gravitate toward nonprofits? And write those reasons down. And then I guarantee some of those same themes are going to show up if you implement them in why other people should give to your organization.
Yes, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Rebecca, is that the kind of thing that you help organizations with as a consultant?
Absolutely, is working a lot of those details out. Because remember, we're not just writing a grant to write a grant. We're writing a grant to get it to the top of the pile as many times as we are able. And so we have to do things that other folks are not thinking about in their development planning that's going to set us aside and really make us stand out as an applicant. And by honing in on that behavior of your donors, of funders too, you're really making yourself more competitive in the process and appealing to the people who want to support your work.
So I understand that grant writers these days are very busy. Organizations are reaching out to grant writers, and to some extent, this is the time to do it, right? It's very obvious why that's happening. But tell us, Rebecca, why is it a good idea to hire a grant writer, an evaluator, um, instead of just having someone do it themselves? What are the pros and cons?
Sure. So, I mean, going back to what we were just talking about, the benefits of hiring a skilled grant writer, someone who really understands fund development as a whole, has the planning piece for, working and engaging donors and bringing stakeholders to the table, having conversations and scripting with funders. You want someone who has experience there and someone who can help you define a true fund development structure that's going to help your organization be sustainable, not just in the present that we're in, but for the rest of the year and going into next year. I don't really think that we can do planning for the next 2-3 years. That's more of an estimate or an anticipated outcome rather. And Peter's going to correct me there because there's a big difference between evaluation and estimated outcomes in planning. But anyhow, so the benefit of hiring a grant writer is to hire someone who's skilled and experienced and knows what they're doing and isn't just working on this one opportunity right now to help get you over the hump. In terms of bringing an evaluator into the mix, there is a huge evaluation piece that goes into the grant application itself. And another, reason why to hire a skilled grant writer is, for myself, for example, so I'm a results-based accountability practitioner. So I'm skilled in evaluation, in research writing. I teach that, I practice that, and a lot of state funders require elements of what they call RBA in their grant applications before they'll even consider funding you. And a lot of foundations believe the same. It's best practices in the field that a grant writer can help you understand and become comfortable with, because the idea is not to have a grant writer, as a consultant always, right? It's to help you gain the necessary knowledge and skills and ability to implement what you're learning and put it into practice so that eventually you can say, bye, Rebecca, I don't need you anymore, and then they come back to you when they need that additional assistance.
You talked about the evaluation section and that, how funders are looking for that. And I appreciate that funders are looking for that. I think it's important to the organizations too, and it's an important way that we all contribute to our shared mission. So you have two responsibilities there. One is to implement something that's research-based. It's just sloppy and irresponsible to make a program out of whole cloth when people have been doing mission-based work for hundreds of years, right? And recently, there's a lot of research about what works and what is the best practice and what is the most equitable practice. And you should be using that. You have a responsibility to use that and implement the best possible program that you can. You also have a responsibility to leave something for the rest of the field. And that's one of the reasons to do your own evaluation, however small it is, however you publish it, ideally on your blog or on social media, so that other programs can learn from your successes and, what do we call them? Fail forwards, right? So other programs can be as strong as they can be. No one program is going to solve this problem all by themselves. You've got to think about yourself as being part of a field.
And I like what you're saying about responsibility. That's twofold, right? You just said the first one was you have a responsibility to share your data back out with the world, to show the progress you're making, and also to show the areas where you could still use some help here. And we can't do this by ourselves. So the second responsibility is recognizing you can't do this work all by yourself. There's population accountability and then there's program accountability. And as programs evaluating the success of our work and opportunities that we could pursue to strengthen it, that's a program accountability. We have to show and ask for help from the greater population if we're going to all do this work together. I like
And
what you said about it being a
people
responsibility.
are nervous about population accountability because they think, oh, that means we're taking responsibility for solving this entire problem for this entire population. And I say, no. It just means we're going to place ourselves on the side of solving this problem.
Right.
And furthermore, we are going to be receptive to feedback from this population in how we address this problem.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Peter, you get asked all the time, is my organization too small to hire an evaluator? I think evaluators get associated with big projects or research projects. Tell us a little bit how a small organization could benefit from an evaluator.
So every organization should have some kind of a feedback system, right?
Mm.
At a minimum, because if you don't know that you're being successful, you don't know when to stop and celebrate, right? Everybody needs some kind of a system. Do you necessarily need to bring in a consultant? Here's where I think sometimes a consultant is really helpful, even though the program is very, very small, is that in my role, I'm really focused on defining your program with a lot of clarity, right? I need that clarity because if I can tell you how to measure it, I have to know exactly what it is. And I think that that helps programs to be designed, understood and designed with more clarity. But yes, evaluations run an entire range from one spreadsheet, one survey, to you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on an evaluation.
So when I was working at a nonprofit, we often had external evaluators because we got a lot of federal funding. And one of the great benefits is when you get fed the data back, and they show you how the data, or how when they do a process evaluation, which often come with a program evaluation, you get to see how your efforts or what you're doing impact the outcomes in a way that is so enlightening and really, really beneficial to the organization.
Organizations getting that feedback, maybe some changes called for. It seems like it's very hard for them to step over that threshold and do something different.
Right.
Why is that? And is that where somebody who specializes in change management comes in?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Oftentimes, an evaluator is required in a federal grant application. So you don't actually have the choice but to hire them.
Yeah, but it comes with the grant. Yeah.
And so that's why, as an organization, you want to get to know the process, but you also want to get to know evaluators who do this, because you have to also report the reasons why you selected this particular evaluator. So even before you bring them on in a proposal, you have to really understand the process and get to know them and vet them too. So I encourage, if anyone is considering an evaluator, to reach out to PETA, have some of that dialogue and understand what it is that she offers with respect to grant proposals, or what the evaluation systems that she does work in. And it'll only benefit you to gain that knowledge.
Yeah. This is all really interesting. I get one common question I get asked is about how do you shift culture, especially organizations that have strong cultures. And in my work, I have found that especially when new CEOs come, but even when there's like an opportunity for changing the organization to be more innovative, right, which is happening a lot now, that you first have to analyze what are the forces going against the change. You really have to dig deep. And I've done this work with some organizations where they have this vision of who they want to become, but and then we start asking hard questions. Talk to us about your culture. How do you appraise performance, right? How do you communicate to your staff? And once we start seeing and detailing What are some beliefs that the organization has? Then the ones that are not working are the ones that we have to create change for. And I tell everybody, you have to measure the change, right? So it's not like it shouldn't be, but often is. Well, we have this new policy, right? And yesterday I was talking to someone and I was using the example of changing your email signature so that it's branded, right? And removing quotes, personal quotes that people have, which can be offensive to your audience, right? And so that's great. You teach everybody how to put the new signature. You give them a copy of your logo. You tell them the rules, no quotes. Okay. Well, who's checking a month later to make sure that that happened? Who's checking to make sure that staff understand why this is important? And
Mhm.
they need to understand why they can't put their quote in their email signature anymore and what their means, or they can't use emojis, right? That deserves a conversation as well, because that's where you get your buy-in. But there also has to be metrics that people are monitoring to make sure that the change happens. And that's where I see things fall apart. I'm sure you see it, Peter, as well.
Yeah, and I think, um, I see data collection and feedback as a continuum. There is data collection that is day to day and feedback that's day to day, and then there's data collection that is annual or even longer cycles.
Yeah,
And the short stuff I think of as process improvement, right? We know this is the right process, and we're just going to do it better, faster, more efficiently, right?
yeah,
Changing your email signature is probably an example of process improvement. And then there's strategic planning. Is this the right thing to be doing at all?
right.
And to do that, you you need higher level data and generally a few years worth of data, and it responds to a different set of questions. So, a lot of times I'm working with a client and they want to build like one dashboard, and we have
Uh-huh.
to push back on that a little bit and say, well, managers probably need a daily or weekly dashboard, but your board does not need that information. Your board needs the quarterly or annual dashboard.
Right. Yeah.
And we've got to look at metrics in a slightly different way, even though we understand these day-to-day ones feed to those annual ones.
Yeah. So, Peter, you also help organizations build dashboards, because that's something I've gotten asked a lot. Like,
Yeah.
you build dashboards. It's like Excel is a great tool.
Put the Excel part of the dashboard is the easy part.
Right.
The hard part is, what do we put in the dashboard? Who is the
Yes.
dashboard for? How do we define a measure to put it in the dashboard? That's very hard. How do we all agree in advance on what this thing means?
Can
How do
everyone
we,
use it? That's another
can
thing.
everyone
Can
use
everyone
it?
use
When
it?
do we look at the dashboard? How do we hold staff accountable for bringing us the information that's going to go in? Because often that's a significant add-on to people's day-to-day routine.
Mm-hmm.
Is something that they have to enter into the computer to generate the data that's going to go into that dashboard. That's the hard part. Putting
Right.
it in Excel, pretty straightforward.
So can
Yeah.
I ask you a question, Cynthia, with
Yeah.
respect to what we're talking about? So you come in and it's a smaller organization and they don't have these systems in place that Pete is talking about. You had mentioned earlier about feeling a sense of grief or loss when things are changing. Now, we had also made mention that there's a little bit of a learning curve when we implement these things like these new dashboards that maybe PETA as the consultant is coming and putting in there. So because I've heard us now a few times talk about who's going to hold folks accountable if they are putting those emojis in their email, if they're not using the proper signature, if they're not putting the inputting the data, into the dashboard. How do you help organizations determine that that's a good idea to do and that everyone is excited about it, so that you're avoiding animosity when people still haven't changed their email signature or they're still not inputting their dashboards? Because that's not PETA's job as the evaluator to monitor, right, PETA? Am I correct? It's the organization. So how do you deal with sometimes that building of animosity?
Yeah. So that's a wonderful, wonderful question. And you said something about how do I come in and make these changes, but the change has to start from within, right? People have to want to do it. And if they're not the ones that co-created the change, then there has to be some work to bring them up to speed, right? You cannot assume that people are simply gonna change the way they're doing things from one moment to another, right? In the example with Peter's dashboards, I mean that's a lengthy process. The questions you guys asked just now can be frightening for a smaller organization, but it starts with conversation, right? Tell us, what would you love to know about your program? So spark their curiosity, because people were so curious all the time, and that gets people excited. And perhaps the first step is creating a dashboard on the data that they would like to see happen. You have to also, in change management and initiatives, have safe spaces where people can admit mistakes, where you're constantly looking to improve and not penalize. And that's really, really important. And then training and learning. That's circular. It's what Peter is saying. That's an evolution, right? You don't just train once, but you continuously train, and you remind people why we're doing this, right? So put it in your employee newsletter. If your CEO does a Monday morning announcement, that person should be announcing it all the time. Bring it up in meetings and have people in their team meetings give you examples on how they're using the dashboard so that they can begin to become engaged with it. So those are just some ideas into how I would encourage an organization to embark on a large change like that.
That's great. One of the things that I hear the three of us talk about a lot, and coming from three different angles of nonprofit, is Peter, you're always talking about that continuous loop, that continuous feedback loop. Cynthia, you just reminded us that it is circular. In my work with fund development, grants, etc., it is revisiting, going back to what did work, where did we receive funds from, doing that constant process improvement. And so we don't just do your piece of the work, Cynthia, and Peter, your piece and mine, and then, okay, now we're good for the rest of the year. This is work that is constantly ongoing. We're constantly checking, we're improving. It's a process in a nonprofit and even in a business, right?
Right.
But it's not something that we want to just do once and put away and close the file cabinet.
Right.
We want to always be looking at these things.
Yeah.
Even if it worked at one point in time or history, the environment around you is changing.
Yeah.
And your organization is changing. So these things have to be constantly revisited.
Yeah. Don't fear the revolving door. Embrace
Right.
it. Make it your own. So we are a little bit over time. I just wanted to give you guys a chance for any closing comments, any takeaways before we wrap up.
I think it's been really helpful to me to see how our three roles are intertwined.
Oh God, yeah.
And how much I can learn from Cynthia about implementing processes into the evaluation process itself, and to think about how the evaluation process and the grant writing process are even more intertwined than I realized.
Yeah. Rebecca, any final comments?
I think we talked today about hiring a consultant in one of our areas, or even a consultant in another area. It's a risk. It's unfamiliar. However, a good skilled consultant is going to be honest with you about those risks, help you assess the risk that you're taking. And a good skilled consultant is also going to deliver for you as much as they are able to get you from where you are to where you want to be. And I think throughout that process, as you start, you probably don't even realize your potential of where you can be So at the end of the day, it's really exciting for organizations to see that finished work and to go through that process.
Yeah, it is. It is. 12 weeks ago, we launched right into an idea and we ran with it. Some of Since then, Coffee Time with Masterminds has had thousands of views from across our nation and around the world. And this show has enabled the three of us to have conversations that deepen our understanding of how leaders feel, what supports they need, and how we can help through our conversations. And so we want to thank each and every viewer and the time that they give us to be part of these conversations, but also our consistent weekly viewers who join us every week, and those who send us emails afterwards to continue the conversation. Leadership has its challenges, but it's very rewarding. And so we want to say thank you for allowing us to be a part of your journey. And we hope everyone has a safe and wonderful holiday, and we'll see you next Friday.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.